Nacht is the night of broken glass. And it was a huge pogrom in Germany, and it was really the beginning of the Third Reich, the Nazis' full acceptance into society to expel and exterminate the Jews. And as I was hearing this, I was thinking, we're all, even if my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, but even if your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents were not Holocaust survivors, there's still a little bit of this glass that we walk upon almost every single day in Judaism, and we've learned to step around it. And we've learned to not only step around it, but we've learned to dance around it. And that joy that we felt, and I'm especially speaking to our seventh graders, the joy that we felt earlier when we're all together singing and joyously singing, that is what I want you to hold on to and remember. But we're always kind of dancing around this broken glass that's on the floor, reminding ourselves that we sometimes exist in this perilous space. And it can be difficult and fragile, but what can also give us hope is not only that we come together and we still celebrate that joy, right? This what we're doing here is the antidote to anti-Semitism for everybody, is to continue living joyful Jewish lives. That was what I was said on Friday, and that's what I'm going to pledge to continue to do for at least the next 25 years with you all. But also because we have some unbelievable leaders in our community who help shepherd us through those times. We have our president, Lisa Fingerhut Carlton, who continues to guide our congregation, all of the past presidents upon whose shoulders she stands. And we also have, she's going to formally introduce him, but we also have Lisa's brother, Eric, who is guiding our entire national North American Jewish community as the president of the Jewish Federations of North America. And it is an incredible gift that he's with us this morning. He's in between many, many things, but he said, I want to be here and I want to share some of that joy and how he is working to help guide us as we dance around this broken glass. So I'm going to welcome Lisa to introduce him, and we'll continue with our program this morning.
Hello? Great. Okay, awesome. Well, that was an amazing pre-introduction. Thank you. But we're at Sukkat Shalom. We're so honored with two extraordinary Jewish professionals this morning, Rabbi Joe Black and Eric Fingerhut, my brother. Many of us this weekend have, it's very loud, have gotten to know Rabbi Immerman's mentor, as we heard earlier, Rabbi Joe. And from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for your gifts of Torah. Am I online? Joe, we really thank you for your gifts of Torah and your gift of music. Others have done a wonderful job introducing you this weekend, so I'm not going to start over, but I did learn something new about you that was really exciting last night. Among the empty nesters here that I was with, I discovered that you were Tiny Tove in a beloved Chicago TV show. What was it? The Magic Door. Now, I didn't grow up in Chicago. We grew up in Cleveland. But there was a lot of buzz last night about you. And I know you have other accomplishments, but obviously that one stands out for many. So thank you for being here. One of my favorite pastimes is to brag about my brother, Eric. This guy's amazing. He's been the president and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America for 4.5 years. And prior to that, he was the CEO of Hillel International. He served in the United States Congress, Ohio State Senate, was Chancellor of Higher Education, and once upon a time practiced law. He's a graduate of Stanford Law School and Northwestern University, where he and Rabbi Joe Black met. His Jewish professional career started back in the day when he was president of CRUSI, Central Region United Synagogue Youth. He sang in the Heights High School choir and played sax in a boy band, the Dukes of Earl. I don't know if that's ever been part of an introduction. Growing up in Cleveland, I think you could say, I don't know if we had the term back then, that we were latchkey kids. And one of my fondest and most memorable moments was when I was in preschool. So Eric was probably 8 years old, maybe in the second grade. And he would go out of his way to walk the opposite direction several blocks to pick me up from preschool at Heights Temple preschool, to walk me home. So this is a guy who goes out of his way, and you have a lot of things happening right now, Eric, and we're just really grateful, and I was not surprised that you would go out of your way to be here today. So without further ado, thank you so much.
So this is a reunion of sorts between me and Eric, because we were at Northwestern together in the late 70s and very early 80s. And he lived in Willard Hall, and I lived in Shepherd Hall across the street. No rivalry or anything like that, but it is really wonderful to see you, Eric. We've seen each other from afar at conferences, and it's great to all the things that you have done and are doing for the Jewish people. So, how have you been?
Oh, I'm fine. Joe, it's great to see you. I just, 3 quick things. Rabbi Immerman, Mazel Tov, and Sukkat Shalom, how lucky you are to have Rabbi Immerman. And Lisa was right. It was in the midst of what this last month has been like to come here and be part of the joy of your installation is really meaningful. So it's wonderful to have you here. And he also has Cleveland roots, so it runs in the family. And Joe, it's great to be with you. And I have followed your career and your music, and it doesn't surprise me because you were an inspiration in college. But it's great to be with you finally in this intimate setting. And my friends at Sukkat Shalom, my sister is the most amazing person. I love her so much. So you're really lucky to have her too. I just want to say that this is Rabbi Immerman said it, it's a very challenging time for the Jewish people. I happened to be in Israel on October 7th, but just by coincidence, and stayed until that Thursday, and then came back to organize our fundraising campaigns and our community mobilization, and then went back the next week. And it's this intense, it's as if the entire country is sitting Shiva. I mean, it's just so profound, because in fact it is that everyone is sitting Shiva. I mean, there's somebody, every family has been touched by this. You think about I believe the number now is 1,200 deaths is what Israel is saying is the most accurate number. And, so proportionately to the size of the population, that's like 20 times 9/11. I mean, that's just to give you some sense. So there's this unbelievable sense of mourning, and then also, determination, but foreboding, because everyone knew that the war that was coming, was going to be very, very difficult and entail certainly loss of soldiers, which we've seen already, the loss of soldiers. So, and of course, the soldiers are them, right? I mean, it's everybody's family, who's fighting. So, it's a very, very serious moment.
And the other thing that those of us who are leading congregations and are part of American Jewish life that we have found, in addition to the grief and the fear that we are feeling as we look at what's happening in Israel, is the reaction that's been happening here in the States as well. One of the things that every rabbi I know has been dealing with, and I certainly have, and I know, Brian, you probably have too, is that relationships that we have built up in the Christian community, in the Muslim community, in the progressive community, in the political sphere, are changed radically. One of the greatest things that made me feel a sense of, I wouldn't say feel good, because it's hard to feel good when this is happening, is colleagues who have reached out to me from the Christian community. A local imam reached out to me, and we actually published a joint letter together about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and that was wonderful. But those numbers were so small. and so many others have not reached out, or the opposite, have been condemning Israel for the simple act of defending herself and fighting against a horrific terrorist organization. So, Eric, I would ask you, what kind of a shift are we seeing in terms of Israel's perception, politically, personally, socially, here in America? What do you? I mean, I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear from you.
So I'm actually going to be the optimist on this question, I first of all, I was, as my sister Lisa said in the introduction, I was in politics. I ran for office, and I won elections, I lost elections, and so I understand that there are. Obviously, we love and respect the First Amendment. People have the right to express themselves. There's always going to be disagreements. I like to joke sometimes that, if you win an election 51-49, you're in office. It still means 49% of the people didn't support you, right? And 55-45 in politics is a landslide. So anybody who wants unanimity, you're never going to find it. And so just. It's really important to remember that the volume of the protests doesn't equal numbers, or doesn't equal support, and also you have to remember sometimes it's concentrated in places that have megaphones, right? Whether it's in the media, college campuses. I mean, we could talk about the risk to our children right now, which is real. As Lisa mentioned, I was the head of Hillel for 6 years, so I know this very, very well. But they've always been pockets of protest. Every poll shows overwhelming majority support for first of all, opposition to Hamas, and overwhelming support for Israel's right and need to defend itself, to restore security to its borders and to its people. Support the President Biden's approach to the war. Support the congressional approach to the war. Congress, the U.S. Senate voted 100-0 on a resolution, condemning the attack and supporting Israel's actions. The United States House of Representatives, 435 members, just in case you forgot your civics, all but 10 members supported an identical resolution. It was the first thing they brought to the floor after they finally got a new speaker and got reorganized. Those are extraordinary numbers. I think you all know, and I'm going to repeat it several times, that there's a major rally that we've organized on the Mall on this coming Tuesday at 1 p.m. If you can still possibly get there, please. It's all about numbers. But we're going to release another poll. We commissioned a poll for that. We'll release it Tuesday morning. We have every reason to believe it's going to show the same overwhelming support. And so, in fact, the purpose of the march is we're going to be at the base of the Capitol. So those of you can picture the National Mall. The stage will be at 4th Street, which is only one block in front of the Capitol, heading towards the mall. And so the crowd will face the Capitol, from the Capitol basically to the Washington Monument. And the idea is that we want Congress to look out its window and see this, mass demonstration in support of their policy. So we do have to remind people that that's the case, because these the protests are, as you said, are very loud. But I do think the support is there. Now, the only other thing I want to add to this, and before we go on, is that there is a difference between the right to express yourself in this country, which we love and adhere to, and the right to threaten and harass and intimidate. And these protests have absolutely crossed that line. And the fact that if anyone can't find their voice, whether it's a university president or a faith leader of another faith, if they can't find their voice to condemn this intimidation and this behavior, you probably have kids at Madison. I happened to be there last week or so ago for another previously engaged speech that I was supposed to give, and so I stopped over at the Hillel because, of course, I know them well, and sat with some of the most amazing, students that you can imagine, the best of the best of the best of the best of our community, and they started out by wanting to tell me how great Jewish life is, how great the Hillel is. They were clearly, they wanted me to know that, that they're not stopping. But then, this one simple fact just stuck in my mind. They told me there's like a college green or something where typically, there's a protest every day. That's where the protests are held. The Students for Justice for Palestine held the pro-Hamas protest in front of Hillel, so they could scream at the students in the building. I mean, that's just pure intimidation. And if you can't find your voice to be able to say that's wrong, and that's then we've got a problem, and so that we have to work on.
We had a protest in Denver. Golda Meir lived in Denver, and her childhood home is on the Aurora campus, which is a downtown campus. It was actually moved there there's a museum. And there was a march, and it wasn't a very large march, but it was a walkout from classes, and they marched from downtown to Golda Meir's house, which is a museum, and that's where they held the protest. We've seen protests in front of synagogues, in front of Hillel. It is very clear, and I'd like you to address this too, Eric, that this is not just an anti-Israel program, or even a pro-Hamas, which is horrific to think that people would be supporting barbarians who beheaded babies. But it's an anti-Jewish protest. And we're seeing that to me is very alarming, more than anything.
Look, by the two things I'll say to this. First of all, I do want to be really clear that these are not pro-Palestinian protests. And every time I get asked it by a reporter or somebody when I'm doing an interview, and for example, I'll get asked, is the rally that we're doing, is the march we're doing this Tuesday a response to, the pro-Palestinian rallies, is usually how I get the question. And I always say, I'm sorry, I challenge the question. These are not pro-Palestinian protests. The Palestinian people are as much captives of Hamas in Gaza as anybody else. I mean, if you're following the news, Israel from day one, established evacuation routes, and they were blocked by Hamas. They were leafleting, they were dropping flyers, leave, here's the route, here's the safe route to leave, here's where you can go, and they were being blocked. Now, as the war has proceeded, and more people are starting to realize that, that Israel will certainly be victorious in Gaza, they are starting, first, a couple of days ago it was 5,000, then it was 10,000, now 50,000, 200,000 people a day are taking the evacuation routes. This is not pro-Palestinian. It is, unfortunately, pro-Hamas. And it's really important to draw that distinction. Look, one of the reasons, if you've seen the posters or on your social media for the march, we actually had, I'll let you inside the thinking. I mean, there was decision whether to do it or not, and from October 7th, there were people advocating that we should do it, and I felt it was important first to do the local rallies and local programs, and then to see what developed. But about a week and a half ago, it felt like it was needed and necessary. And then the second conversation was, well, is it about supporting Israel, or is it about the hostages, or is it about anti-Semitism? And we decided, well, it's about all three. And so if you see the flyer, it says exactly that. It says, it says Americans, and it's not going to be just Jews. It is Americans because, first of all, we're marching as Americans on our national mall to tell our representatives and our president that we support what they've done and we want them to continue to support it. And Americans of all faiths are joining because they understand that Israel's war against Hamas is no different than America's war was against Al Qaeda or against ISIS or other similar terrorist wars. And by the way, America is under attack. The same people that are attacked Israel are calling for death to America, and they're lobbing missiles at our troops and our ships in the Middle East. So it is America's war. But on the anti-Semitism point, which is what, Joe, you were asking, we know America is not an anti-Semitic nation. We know this has been the most welcoming environment for Jews in the outside, in the diaspora, in the 4,000-year history of the Jewish people, and we have to make sure that doesn't change. These protests are an effort to intimidate us in our communities and on our campuses and to scare us. And we have to come out and say we won't be intimidated and we won't be scared. And of course, there's a security. The number one question I get asked is about the security of the event. And I can promise you that every agency of the federal government is, we're on the National Mall, with the FBI. I talked to the director of the FBI myself. I talked to the director of Homeland Security myself. I talked to the Attorney General myself. It's going to have every element of national security that you can possibly have. But there's no perfect, you can't make a perfect promise ever, and we shouldn't. And we should still show up, because the best way to respond to the intimidation that is occurring in our communities is to show we're not scared and to not allow ourselves to be intimidated. So I really do believe that this is that the response to, you're right, this is a rise in anti-Semitism, there's no question. I mean, Amy and I have a son at Ohio State. They were out walking, boys walking on High Street. Anybody know where High Street is? It's the main drag in Columbus by the campus, and car pulls up, says, "Are you Jewish?" Punches a kid, breaks his jaw. I mean, this is pure anti-Semitism, ripping down Israeli flags and the posters of the hostages. But we have to respond by standing up and by being visible and vocal and not showing that we're scared.
Shifting gears just a little bit, when we look at what is happening in Gaza, we look at what's happening in Israel. Sue, my wife's family, was founders of a kibbutz in northern Israel, kibbutz Sasa. That whole kibbutz has been evacuated to the center of the country, except for those who are picking apples, because now is the apple, that's your cousin. What is, there's danger from Lebanon, from Hezbollah, there's danger from the south. What do you think is the endgame of the Netanyahu government right now once Hamas, God willing, is eradicated and please God the hostages are freed? What is the next step? Or does Israel have a plan? What do you think?
Look, there's obviously not a full plan yet. I mean, they were historically dramatically wrong about what they thought before October 7th. And so you can bet there's rethinking going on in every strategic level. The one thing I do want to, actually, two things worth mentioning before I try to guess what the future holds. By the way, since I would never have ever guessed I'd be in this position at this time, I'm not the best prognosticator of anything. But first of all, please, everyone, as American citizens, let's appreciate what the American military is doing right now. The aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean and in the Gulf are there for one reason, and that is to deter Hezbollah which is basically Iran, from opening a second front in the north. That's why they're there. And it's, thank God it's working so far, and, you know, God willing, it'll continue to work. But let's just as Americans, you know, make sure we appreciate that. And I know it, trust me, the Israelis get it. The Israelis absolutely get it. They know it, they appreciate it. And you know, look, this is, I don't want to be too depressing, but we're basically in a world war. It's just through proxies, right? And of course, the danger is that it goes from being a world war by proxies to an actual world war. Iran and Russia and China to some extent, but basically Iran and Russia are fighting through proxies. Hezbollah and Hamas are their proxies, had Hezbollah followed in the north after the Hamas attack on the south, you know, we would be in a very, very, dangerous existential situation, and and then America would have to decide whether it was going to become active, an active combatant or not. I mean, that's how close we were and probably still are to the precipice here. So let's appreciate America's role here. The other thing I want to say, and then I'll answer your question. My favorite Yogi Berra line. He was famous for if you yogiisms, right? If you come to a fork of the road, take it, right? So it's before I speak, I got a few things I want to say. That was my favorite.
Are you sure you're not a rabbi?
So anyway, the people making the decision about the war right now are basically 5 people. There's a war cabinet. No one else is in it. None of the Meshuggahs who are in this government, that's the technical term for some of them, are in the room. The fact that Benny Gantz, who of course was in opposition, but he's a former defense minister and he's a former chief of staff, immediately came in and was brought into the war cabinet, is enormously significant. And he brought with him Gadi Eisenkrat, who was part of his party, who's also former IDF chief of staff. So you basically have Gantz, Eisenkrat, and Gallant, who's the sitting minister of defense. These 3 are total professionals. They know what they're doing, and they are calm and measured and really, really smart, strategic people. The other 2 are the prime minister and Ron Dermer, who's a former ambassador to the United States from Israel, who grew up in America, and he's sort of the foreign minister of the war cabinet, if you will. He's not really making strategic, where to send the troops. He's communicating it and talking to the other governments, and so it's actually in really quite good hands. And I think that's important. I think that's important to know. I think that Israel just celebrated its 75th anniversary. I think it's a whole new country today. It's a whole new country, and
after October 7th.
After October 7th, and I don't think it'll ever. I don't know what it'll exactly look like. They will never again tolerate this kind of buildup on their borders ever. It'll never happen again. The debate about is it an occupation or not will go on forever. But I'm telling you, the residents of Gaza are as much, are as much the victims of this as, So they'll have to be a new way of governing. At some point, Iran is going to have to be, dealt with in some way. The reason they build up Hezbollah on the north is both because if they get a chance to destroy Israel, they would take it, but also because if Israel went after Iran, Hezbollah would go after Israel, right? So it was sort of their defense against Israel going after Iran, and the world's going to have to deal with that. It's not just Israel can't deal with it alone. But I actually think the bigger issue is the bigger change in Israel, and I don't know what it'll look like, and we'll all play a role. All of us together play a role. By the way, it's so interesting, Joe. I wonder how you experience this in your congregation and in Denver, but or among your colleagues in the rabbinate. For all the talk about how Israel and American Jews have grown distant, my experience is the complete opposite, right? It's not, and I'm not talking politically. It's just, look, we're married to each other. We're in business together. We're on social media instantly. 750,000 of our kids have been on Birthright and have friends in in Israel. There's before October 7th. Well, before COVID, for sure, there were direct flights daily from 15 airports, and they're always full. There's somebody on those planes. In my own organization, I have 3 of my senior people, including my executive vice president, who's my number 2, my chief communications officer, and 2 or 3 are dual citizens because one of their parents is Israeli. They grew up in America. You wouldn't, I didn't go out to hire people who had family in Israel or who spoke Hebrew or had carried Israeli passports. It's just the way we are now. There's a million Israeli Americans, today. So it's a 6th maybe of our 12, whatever. I don't know what's our Jewish population in America, 7 million, something like that. I don't know, whatever the number is. So it's a different. We're in a different world, and I think Rabbi Immerman, you were talking about how we mix. You talked about Kristallnacht and how we mix joy and sadness. So every time, whether it's Tisha B'Av, our day where we put together all the historical things that we mourn for. Or in the Seder when we say in every generation people versus or on Yom Kippur when we read the martyrology and all the history of all the those. This event is as significant in Jewish history as every single one of those events. Every single one of those. This is now in our liturgy. This is now in our history books, and so nothing can be the same again. And I don't know what all that, but we can't be divided the way we were divided. We can't argue about the things we were arguing about. We can't allow ourselves. Nothing can be the same.
Last April, I served as a delegate to the World Zionist Congress in Jerusalem for the Reform Movement. And while I was there, the infighting, if you ever want to see chaos in motion, look at Israeli and especially international Zionist politics. It's remarkable. Screaming and yelling and cheating and all kinds of things happening. I was also able to participate 3 times. Sue and I went to the demonstrations in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem with 600,000 people, all over the country, protesting against the government. On October 8th, the people who were organizing the protests started organizing ways to help, to go into the fields, to help pick the crops, to support the government. Certainly those who were in the armed forces. The main organizer of these protests was an organization called Achim B'Neshek, Brothers in Arms. These were Israeli servicemen who were protesting against the government. A complete 180, the entire country is unified because we're fighting an existential battle. So that's one of the things that we are seeing happening, certainly in America as well. We are united as an American Jewish community, with the exception of a few extreme voices that I feel should be ashamed of themselves, but that's another discussion, who are protesting. But the main reality is that what's going to happen on Tuesday is, how many people are we expecting? Do we have any idea?
So I've threatened anybody who uses a number in public because I want
a lot of people.
Because I want to exceed expectations. It'll be a lot of people. Here's what I can tell you. There are last time I heard there were over 1,100 chartered buses that have asked us registered for parking spaces. We've overflown the RFK Stadium parking lot, the FedEx parking lot, and we're looking for more. We've prepaid $500,000 worth of Metro cards to hand out to people to getting off those buses. We know there's chartered planes from Chicago and from other places, from Denver, from other places. There's not a single ticket available to Washington, D.C. on any airline from any place on Tuesday. So we're expecting a good crowd. But that doesn't mean that you're excused. No, I'm serious. This is one of the reasons why I'm reluctant to do this publicly. This isn't public. This is private, right? The doors are closed. No one's tweeting, right? We
are live streaming. Just
right. No, because I don't want anybody. I don't want anybody to feel excused. I mean, obviously, I know not everybody can come for logistical and other reasons, but this really is, a show up moment. A show up moment. I mean, I've been asked about live streaming from day one. I mean, there'll probably be live streaming, but you know what? I don't want to talk about live streaming and setting up local watch parties. We need people to come.
So our time is limited. Are there any questions that people have here that you want to ask Eric? Please. Yeah.
That's it.
So the question is, we see a lot of grassroots conversations happening in Israel from different political sides, from Israelis and Palestinians, from the left and the right. How can we help foster those conversations to continue? Is that okay?
Well, I think that there's a lot we can do, and then you brought it back to campus, so to America. In Israel, I mean, we, the collective Jewish communities, are engaged with all of these organizations, and we need to continue to lean into them and support them and participate with them and lift them up. I think there's going to be a 100% change in who's in government, and I mean, hopefully some of these people will become. I mean, the volunteer effort that Joe described, which I also observed. By the way, it was the weirdest feeling was we had our General Assembly, which is the big conference of the Jewish federations every year, right after the World Zionist Congress that Joe described, and it was at the Tel Aviv Expo Center, like the convention center, and there were thousands of protesters outside, with horns, everything. And so the last time I walked up that walk, I was walking through thousands of protesters, and then when I went back right after October 7th, all those people were inside using the building to organize the effort. Government is not even, other than the military effort, government is absent, the national government. And so civil society is filling this gap. And all of us are doing everything we can to support them and hope that they become that they'll ultimately become the leaders, I believe, of the country. Many people are going to emerge from this to lead, and we need to help them and support them. In America, I do think that that there's a need, and it's certainly something that I feel a responsibility to help be involved in, for a more concerted, focused, collaborative response on the anti-Semitism and the campuses and all that. I mean, there's a lot of individual efforts that are organizational efforts that are important and that are good. Certainly, our friends at Hillel are working their their tails off to do what's needed. But the level that we have to rise to on this, I think, is at a higher level than we're at right now.
I'll bring a microphone over. I can say this. It's a Phil Donahue moment because this is Chicago. Yeah.
Thank you. Here's what I'm concerned about. Israel, of course, has no alternative but to destroy Hamas as a military force, a threat, and as the governing body of Gaza. Let's just accept that as a fact. Israel also says that this is not going to be easy because of the way Hamas has embedded itself within all the civilian infrastructure, and that it's not something that's going to be concluded within weeks. It's going to be months or as long as it takes. Let's assume that's true. I'm concerned about public opinion and support in America because we can all have discussions about what's a just war and why civilians are dying because of Hamas's tactics. The reality is the newspapers and the broadcast TV are full of dead civilians. And we have all the explanations for why that's happening and why it might be just under the circumstances. But Israel needs America's support, and it needs America's financial support. Congress is a mess as it is. At some point, I think Israel is going to lose the support of too many people in the political system, and that's a problem. And I don't know if there's any solution to that. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, I agree with everything you said, except the inevitability of it. This is our job. This is our most important job in America right now. Every time I talk to somebody in Israel, that's what they ask us to do first and foremost. And so we need to counter it. That's the purpose of the march on Tuesday, is to be clear that the overwhelming majority of Americans support, want our government to continue to support Israel until that inevitable need is accomplished. And after that, we're going to continue. I mean, we have this responsibility. Look, this is, I've won, like I said, I've run for office, I've won elections, and I've lost elections. I guarantee you that the voices that come from politicians' districts and homes are the most important thing that they hear. And if all they hear from is those who are opposed, then they will think that's what their constituents want. And our job is going to be to make sure that they hear from us. And we're going to have to continue and continue and continue as long as it takes.
Yes, let me come over here. No, they want to hear you on the line. That's why you need the microphone. It's not, yeah.
And it won't be easy. I understand, but we have to do it.
No, I don't know that I've formulated a really good question about this, but I personally have a moral challenge watching the news, right? Watching Gaza being flattened and the news about the hospital and the children. I believe Israel has a right to defend itself, but I personally feel terrible about what's happening. And so how do you talk to someone like me and others who are literally pained watching what's happening?
I'm really glad you asked the question, because I know a lot of us are thinking it, and I think we have to grow comfortable answering it. And it begins with every single loss of life is a tragedy. Every single innocent life is a tragedy. And what was you mentioned Golda Meir before. I mean, the famous Golda Meir, we can forgive them for killing our sons. We can't forgive them for making us kill their sons. And that's how Jews feel. It's a terrible time that not only are we losing our soldiers, but our sons and daughters are killing others. That is not who we are or what we want to do or where we want to be. And everything begins with that, and we need to say it and feel it. And then you also do need to understand, and we need to help people understand that unfortunately what they're seeing in the news is not the full picture at all of what Israel's doing. The fact is that Israel could have flattened that hospital on day one. They have the capability, the military capability to do that. The fact that they haven't done that, which is the military headquarters of Hamas, the people against whom we are fighting, the people who murdered and slaughtered 1,200 of our brothers and sisters and babies, we know exactly where their military headquarters is, but because it's in a hospital, shame on them, because it's in a hospital, we haven't done it. And our soldiers are inching closer and closer and finding ways to get the babies out and get people out of the hospital, and warning and warning and warning and inching closer and losing their lives because of it. We could have saved those 5 soldiers, reservists were killed yesterday in a booby-trapped, hit a booby trap in a tunnel. We lost 5 fathers yesterday because we're doing it that way in order to get to the place where we can get as many out as possible before that hospital is flattened, which it will be. So that's the story. It's not a defense of innocent lives dying, but it is an understanding that if this were up to Israel, not a single innocent life would be at risk. It is literally Hamas that is putting these people's lives, continues to put them in front of the guns, so that they will be targeted. And that is the story that is the story that we have to make sure. It's not a story. That is the facts that we have to help people understand.
I live in Denver, and oftentimes people will come to me in crisis. And one of the ways that I help people deal with that is I say, look at the mountains. What's the best way to see the Rocky Mountains? Is it right in the foothills when you are at the base of the mountain? Or when we can see from Denver and we can see the whole expanse of the mountain? And the answer is when you're far away. When we are right up close, all we are seeing is what's in front of our faces, the immediacy. And I think our task, all of us, certainly those of us who are in leadership positions, is to help keep telling people, keep the perspective. It is horrific. You're right. I can't watch. And by the way, I would encourage everybody at the same time to take breaks from social media, from news. Just sit back, because we are all traumatized right now. And I think it's important to understand that we are dealing with trauma. Not as much, obviously, as those who are living it every day in Israel, but we are dealing with trauma, and we need to be able to move away just for a second, just to catch our breath, because we can't help anyone, let alone ourselves, if we are constantly engaged. That's number one. And number two, to understand that this is not the immediacy of what we're seeing in front of us, and that's what those protesters who Hamas understands, that when the truth of who they really are comes out more and more, they are not going to be the beloved of the far left. They're not going to be the beloved of those walking. So they're taking advantage of everything they can right now. And it is horrific. And that's the reason they're telling people not to leave, because this is the despicable nature of who Hamas is that every Palestinian death they see as a victory. And when you deal with an enemy like that, Israel talks about Tohar HaNeshek, the purity of arms. When we're facing an enemy who deliberately puts civilians and innocents in harm's way, it's going to be a horrific situation. But Israel will not allow Hamas to ever gain power again. So that's part of what we're dealing with. Rabbi, you want to?
I wish that I could swoop in and interject, but this is where we are in our world right now. And I think when people have been asking me, how are you feeling? It depends who's asking me, but sometimes it's I'm feeling things. And it's the incredible difficulty of how we are feeling that sometimes makes this a difficult moment to untangle what's happening. For those of you who follow me on Facebook, I published a poem that I wrote, which was where I said, I don't know how, and that I ended with, I don't know how to do what today is asking of me, because this is not something we have been confronted before in our lifetimes. It's not something that we're supposed to know how to do. And the most important thing that I have been saying that I know Eric and Rabbi Black agree with is that there's a rabbinic teaching, Elu ve'elu, that this and that we are called in this moment to hold all of these tensions in our hands, and that's overwhelming. And it is continuing to be overwhelming and overwhelming and overwhelming because we are grieving every single innocent life lost. There's no question about it, right? That is deep in our Jewish tradition that we grieve every single innocent life lost. And we have to figure, and, as you've heard. And that is what is so unbelievably difficult and grueling at this time. Please know that I am always here to continue this conversation. I'm here just to listen. I'm here to send you readings that I think are helpful in processing this. I sent a sermon to the group of us, 40, 45 people who've been meeting on Thursdays. Unfortunately, not this Thursday because I was not feeling great. But we've been trying to process what's happening by taking giant steps back and looking at some Jewish texts and way to process how we deal with multiple tensions and narratives and some history. And Rabbi Ken Chasen wrote a sermon that I sent to that group, and I'm happy to send it to you. He's a rabbi at Leo Beck Synagogue in LA, and he quoted one of his teachers, Rabbi David, blanking on his last name. He quoted this rabbi a reform rabbi who made Aliyah and was a tank battalion commander in the First Lebanon War. Rabbi David Foreman, thank you. And the sermon that Rabbi Chasen wrote was called The Stained Canvas of Morality. And what he taught, which is incredibly helpful for me, is that this is not, the conversations we're having are not about right and wrong. When you have a decision between right and wrong, we choose the right decision, right? If we're going to hold the door open for somebody or let it slam in their face, we hold the door open for that person, right? When somebody in our community is ill and we need to send them some food and check in on them, we send them some food and check in on them, right? There's very clear decisions, and when we're faced with those clear decisions, we know what to do, but we're not faced with a right and wrong decision right now, Rabbi Chasen and Rabbi Foreman taught. We're faced between two wrong decisions. Right and wrong and wrong. And those are the moral, that's the gravity of what we're dealing with right now. And that was, I heard this from Rabbi Chasen before he gave the sermon. I was on a Zoom with him. And it was so helpful to understand how difficult this is, because when we have to choose between two wrong decisions, we don't want to make the decision. Fortunately for us, we're not in a position to be making decisions, right? We're not leading these people. And so what we're left with sometimes is just this unbelievable grief, and that's really, really difficult. And that's difficult no matter how old you are or what we've seen in this world. So please just know myself, Rabbi Tickbrill, we're all here for you just to sit and process and grieve. This coming Friday, we're going to try something different. We've started to realize that when we don't have big, amazing things happening in the synagogue, sometimes people don't want to come on Friday nights. That's okay. But we're going to do services in the round in the social hall and just make it more of an intimate moment of holding ourselves, because sometimes we just need to be, and we just need to sing the songs that we've been singing for generations, and just sit. And that's what we're going to do this coming Friday night for services. I am heading down to D.C. to be with Eric and with his sister Lisa and a few other leaders from our congregation. Missy's going to be joining us. And as I said on Friday, my big reason for going, in addition to standing in front of the Capitol, it's actually really not to stand in front of the Capitol, but I'm happy to do so. It's because I want to be with other Jews. I want to show that nobody is going to take away my pride at being Jewish, and that even when there are awful things happening in this world, and even when Jewish brothers and sisters are doing some things that people don't agree with, that I still love being Jewish, and I'm going to find hope in my own Judaism and just being together with other Jews. So again, I'm happy to talk at any point. I want to really thank Eric for taking a moment from your incredibly busy schedule to come be with us. I want to thank Rabbi Black for spending this weekend with us and all of the gifts you've given us. And the thing we know how to do best as a Jewish community, no matter what the circumstances, whether we're grieving or mourning, is we know that we need to eat. So we're going to invite you to head all the way into the social hall where there's coffee and bagels and some schmear. Our students will come up with us, and we'll just take a moment to hold ourselves. So I wish you all a Shavua Tov. May we have a blessed week.